Well, let's begin. It's time to begin. And I thank you all for being here. And our special thank particularly to Dick Osborn for being willing to share a very special thing with us. Special in terms of his own life, but also special in terms of his study. And we are grateful for that. So this is not merely an academic enterprise for him, but we might call it an existential one. So thank you, Dick, for doing this for us. Let's begin with prayer. Dear God, we are thankful again for this technology. We are thankful particularly this time for Richard Osborn, for Dick. We are mindful of the extraordinary contributions he has made to the great Advent movement, and we express our gratitude to him and to you for that gift to us. In Christ's name, amen. All right, Dick.
Well, it's nice to be here. I actually started my morning at 7 o'clock at the first Branson class at Sligo Church. And we had about 90 people on, including Jan Paulson, all the way from Norway. So many of us were able to express our condolences to him over the loss of his wife. John Brunt taught the class. He used to be the pastor at Azure Hills and at Walla Walla, the academic dean. And he's now retired in Washington, still pastoring. And he tied in to talk about his new book on the Bible. So it was an amazing community that we had there with many of the alumni, as they said, of the Branson class at Sligo Church. What I want to suggest this morning is that much of the search of our lives is to find a search for home, and that a lot of the meaning that we get in life is how we answer that question about what home is. Especially now that most of us are confined to our homes, how do we define home in this context? As I mentioned in the little intro that some of you had received, Norma and I lived in the Washington, D.C. area for 36 years. And in that time period, we moved 4 times, 2 apartments and 2 houses. We left for PUC in 2001, and since then we have moved 9 times. I guess that averages about every 2 years we've moved. We've moved our daughter 3 times. We had a house in Arizona that we moved into and out of. So you add that up, it's quite a bit of moving. And so it led me into thinking about, for myself, what is home? If I'm moving all the time, what really is home? I remember when we left Maryland in 2001, our son Trevin did not want to move. He said, "I hate California." It's ironic that he lives here now. I think he's beginning to enjoy it, but he still sees himself as a Marylander. But I remember we packed up our car to drive across the country, went to Mark's Kitchen, which was a little Korean restaurant near the Tacoma Park Church. We gave our hugs and said goodbye, and I remember looking in the side view mirror as Trevin walked back to his car, thinking to myself, life has changed forever. Our home will no longer be his home, because he had identified that home being around the geography of the home that we had lived in. He would come and visit us, yes, like a lot of tourists come to the Napa Valley, but that would never for him be home, because it was a different place than when he was raised. So I began to think after that, what is home? What does it really mean? We move so often that our identity can no longer be centered perhaps around the territory or the place we live. And if you would look at the email that Dave sent out with some of the quotations that I have, I'm going to pull some ideas from those quotes, but not totally. Mary Piper wrote a book that many of you probably read, Reviving Ophelia, but she also wrote a book called The Middle of Everywhere, which was a story about immigrants moving to, of all places, Kermit's old college place, Lincoln, Nebraska. And in that book were some powerful thoughts that I have on that handout for you, and I'll just pull a few of them. Who are we when we don't have a hometown, when we don't know our neighbors or our kin? We all need a global positioning system of identity Today, identity from sense of place is no longer a given. Demographic clusters have replaced national identity as the great definers. And then going on, home is where you know the names of the people you meet. You know who is kind and honest and who lies, betrays, or fools around. Home is where people care if you have a speeding ticket or a fever. It's where people ask about your grandbaby and your daylilies and know your favorite kind of pie. The big question for this decade are, will we live in real places and have homes, or will we allow ourselves to be identified as consumers in a soulless global landscape? As we become global citizens, we need a home to hold our lives in place. We need to turn off our televisions, go outside, look at the stars, and visit with our neighbors. I wonder 20 years later, after she wrote the book, if this still applies, and I would argue that it probably still does. So I want to begin this class by asking some of you a question. Where are you from? So Dave, I'm going to start with you. If someone comes up to you and says, where are you from? How do you respond?
I was asked that question once in Hawaii, not long ago, and I was asked, where's your home? And I said, I have no home. I've lived a long time in Southern California, but there's a difference between having a home and living someplace, even if one lives there for a long time. By the time the taxi driver brought us to the airport, he said, Mr. Hawaii is your home. And I thought, that's right. That's where my brother is buried. I guess so. I was born in Reno, but when I was 3 weeks old, my parents went to Hawaii, and we stayed there till I was about 13. And so actually I've lived the longest of my life here in California, but I don't know if I'd call it home.
We'll get into that as we go on here. Would someone else be willing to answer that question? If someone asked you, where are you from? How do you respond?
Oregon.
But you're living now in?
Pennsylvania. We've had 3 houses now in Pennsylvania and 1 condo.
And why don't you call Pennsylvania your home?
As you were speaking earlier about family, people who know you, people I went to grade school with, academy with, they're all there.
Anyone else?
Myself, Joan Sabate, my home is Barcelona. I was there born, raised, studied medicine, got married, our first son. When I was 30, I moved to Loma Linda. I've been here for 35 years. So my question is, can I have 2 homes? Because I feel fully identified with Barcelona, the Catalan culture, and also with Loma Linda and the Southern California. I have my sons, my 3 grandsons and daughters. So I do think I have 2 homes.
Okay. I'm going to pick on Ron Lawson now. Ron, you lived in New York City a long time. And then you moved to North Carolina. Now you're in Loma Linda, but we all know that you were raised in Australia. What's home for you?
If people ask me where I come from, it's Australia. And that's where I still know the birds and the culture the best, I think, because New York is so diverse. But I did live for 45 years in New York, so I've obviously got roots there too. And I feel quite strange in Southern California because I've only been here a year, and I still don't know all my neighbors. So that's not going very well, is it? Got to do better. And here we are, all jammed in our homes, not speaking to each other.
So when I see you, I see New York City, Ron. I've got to admit it. I'm going to pick on my old friend Kermit.
I think the context of the question would change the answer to you know, in other words, if it's with some people that I know, like work acquaintances, and they say, where are you from? My answer is Minnesota. Now, I wasn't born there, but it's where we moved when I was 7, and my parents didn't move away until I was in my 50s or 60s. So Minnesota is kind of that cultural frame of reference that defines what is home. But if it's somebody new that I'm recently meeting and they're trying to place me, it's where are you from? Well, I'm bifurcated at the moment. I happen to live in Hamburg at the moment. No, let me change that. I'm self-quarantined in Hamburg at the moment. I still have a house in Silver Spring, Maryland. So it's a little more difficult for me to answer that, but probably Pennsylvania is the answer at the moment.
Let me go on a little bit here. You know, this might seem like a very mundane question, but it really gets at some of the deepest levels of thought and meaning for each of us when we think about where we're from. Do we think about it being a geographical location, centered perhaps around a favorite house? Is it in the relationships that we create with each other? What is home when our lives are faced with change, like immigration or parental death, or perhaps residence in a nursing home? Some of you have experienced divorce. And what is it when you go through a divorce? What about the homeless? What is home for the homeless people? Or if you're a third culture kid that was raised in an international setting to American parents, let's say, what is home? Is it where you were raised, or is it an identity of what your passport says you are? So I guess my question is one of the goals of perhaps a church, perhaps a Sabbath school class like this, is to help people define for themselves what home is, because I think it's a very powerful image in our lives. As I reminisce a little bit now, what I'd like you to do is let your minds roam a little bit. Some of you already have into this idea of home. For me, for almost all my life, my identity of my home was my parents' home in Tacoma Park, because that's where the family gathered for major events like Christmas and Thanksgiving, where we came back and would go to Sligo Church. They lived 2 blocks from Sligo Church. And so the home that I identified was around my parents' home, even though we lived in multiple homes during that time period. And there are things about that home I remember. This last week, my wife made a noodle dish. That was my mother's recipe, and it was the best meal I'd had in months, because it brought back all those memories of home from even a recipe that I enjoyed. We enjoyed Christmas with my parents for 54 out of 57 years. So that was a huge identity. The first time we didn't do that in PUC, our kids came, they said, this has been the most boring Christmas we've ever had. We want to go back to Tacoma Park next year. And so we went back to our old tradition. It's even being in places like, my wife and I were in Sagunto, Spain, at the Adventist College there on the tour of Adventist colleges abroad. When we began to smell the climate, the trees, the fruits, the vegetables, it took us back to where we met each other in Beirut, Lebanon. And so even in Sagunto, we were evoking memories of home. When we would drive up to a Loma summer camp every summer with my father, when he was treasurer of the Central California Division Conference, we would smell that smell that you get when you drive into Yosemite, which evokes these sorts of feelings. Or when I drive to Monterey Bay Academy, as I drive into the campus, there are the eucalyptus trees, and there's the smell of the ocean. All of these things evoke these kinds of feelings. I have the memory of living with my grandparents in Mountain View. My parents, when I got to be a 9th grader, they said, where would you like to go to school next year? We were in Montevideo, Uruguay. You can go to the boarding academy here, you can take home study here, you can go to Monterey Bay Academy and be near your grandparents, Mountain View. It would give you 2 weeks to decide. I said, I don't need 2 weeks. I want to go to MBA. Right. And so I went there, and that year my grandparents were my parents. And I remember they had this ritual, 9:30 every evening. They would read the Sabbath School Quarterly. We would kneel down and say the Lord's Prayer, the group, the 3 of us, and then go to bed. I couldn't get to sleep. So I would listen to the radio at that time, the San Francisco Giants, trying to hear Willie Mays hit a home run against Sandy Koufax, turn off the lights, and I would hear a train going by the railroad tracks of Pacific Press, which was several blocks away, and be lonely for my parents all the way in Uruguay. 40 years later, I was on an accreditation visit to Mountain View Academy. They put us up in a hotel near the same train track, and guess what? The whistle of the train went by, took me back to my grandparents' home 40 years before and what I was experiencing then. So there are many of these memories that can create home. In the handout that I gave you, or that was in the email, there was a song that I put in there that I wish I could play, but I can't. Calling My Children Home. It's a beautiful song. And if you get a chance, go on Google and pull this up because you'll see several versions of it. One by Emmylou Harris, but the one by Chanticleer is my favorite. Let's just look at these words. Those lives were mine to love and cherish, to guard and guide along life's way. Oh, God forbid that one should perish, that one, alas, should go astray. Back in the years with all together, around the place we'd romp and play, so lonely now, I often wonder, oh, will they come back home someday? I'm lonesome for my precious children. They live so far away. Oh, may they hear my calling and come back home someday. I gave my all for my dear children. The problems still with love I share. I braved life's storms, defy the tempest to bring them home from anywhere. I lived my life, my love I gave them to guide them through this world of strife. I hope and pray we'll live together in that great, glad here after life. See if you can listen to that this afternoon. It's a beautiful song. Thomas Wolfe wrote a book called You Can't Go Home. And as nostalgic as all of these ideas are, an anonymous author wrote, when you finally go back to your old hometown, you find it wasn't the old home you missed, but your childhood. I'd like to suggest that home should revolve around three things: place, people, and paradise. And as we unwrap these, I'd like different ones on this telecast here to share what your thoughts might be about each of these. So the first is place.
There's a lot of interference coming in. It could be from you, Lee. Somebody needs to mute their mic.
Probably a bunch of people need to mute.
Everybody mute their mic unless they're talking.
All right. Moving on, place. If you'll notice on the email that Dave sent out, there's a quote there from Edward Casey. My friend Bruce Anderson, a psychiatrist up at, in England, gave this book to me to look at. Casey is a philosopher who's done a lot of thinking about the idea of place. And this is just one or two sentences from his book, The Fate of Place. Whatever is true of space and time, this much is true for place. We are immersed in it and could not do without it. To be at all, to exist in any way, is to be somewhere, and to be somewhere is to be in some kind of place. Place is as requisite as the air we breathe, the ground on which we stand, the bodies we have. The problem is that if we're moving all the time, place is a difficult way to define home. There are ways, if you move a lot, to define home around place by creating certain rituals and ideas that are related to the place you live in. But I'm wondering if some of you could talk a little bit about the places that have been really important for you in your identity home. Any volunteers? And I guess, Bronwen, who's gonna, or was Dave or Forrest? You were gonna monitor the raising of hands, right?
Okay, if one goes to participants and opens that on the lower left-hand corner, there is a raised hand, a blue hand, and if you want to speak, click that and I'll put you on the queue. I'm going to invite people, particularly those who are not being seen, to make sure that your audio is off, I mean, the microphone is off until you speak, because that way we'll have less background noise. Okay, who wants to go first?
So what we're asking is, what are some of the favorite places that you have in mind, and it might be where you are right now, as related to home?
Favorite places.
I'm going to jump into that because I'm not bashful. When I was a kid, by the time I was 13, I believe we had moved 7 or 8 times. But one of the things that created a sense of place was a Friday night supper. There really were only two options for Friday night supper, both of which were loaded with grams of sugar, and it was my favorite meal. My mother would either make fruit soup, which had lots of dried fruit, then cooked up and loaded with sugar. And if there wasn't quite enough sugar, we added a scoop of ice cream to the middle of the fruit soup. But it was that kind of revelry. And then from that point on Friday night, my mother, my father, and I was an only child, the three of us spent that time pretty much together always. And it created a sense of place that rotated from living room to living room to living room, from dining room to dining room to dining room, but was still that sense of place. And Dick, when you mentioned that there are other ways to create place besides just the geography, I immediately thought of that.
Well, Dawn has her hand up.
Yeah, I think for me, as an immigrant, and I have lived in several places, and my home is where I feel comfortable. I remember my childhood and how comfortable I was, but as I grew and I recognized the struggles of the people that made that home for me, and I became their caretakers, I recognize that their strength is my own strength. I cannot wish for them anymore. They couldn't give that to me. So my home is where I feel the strongest. And there are things that when people hear me, they immediately know that I'm not from the United States. So that's the external pressure. That if I say this is my home, no, you come from somewhere else. So there's that struggle too. Where do I belong? So I've had to carve an identity for me that I choose where I belong. Betrayals are difficult to deal with from people you love or from people that you depended on. And so for those of us who fled wars or who had to find shelter in different communities, home is where we feel the strongest.
Okay, Rodeny?
I think the interesting question is why do some people feel more strongly about needing a home than others? When I was in my 20s and 30s, when people would ask me where's home, I would fairly glibly say I'm a child of the planet. I really didn't feel that I needed a home. Home was where I put my head down, where I slept. I lived in several countries, and I was a traveler. I had a traveling spirit. I was on the move. It wasn't until my early 40s that I felt that I needed to put some roots down and even thought about really having a home in terms of any geography or particularly even any country. I somewhat thought I was invincible and I could drop me off anywhere in the world and I would survive and I would make a home. It wasn't until I hit my 70s that I realized I wasn't invincible and I needed to think more about a home. But probably from my point of view, my home is probably where I would choose to go to die. But it really comes down in my mind to something what Dan was saying is that where does my spirit feel most healthy, comfortable, alive, vibrant, maybe at times even quiet. So where is my spirit healthy? That's where I'm looking for home. That's when I feel home. It really has nothing to do with geography. It has everything to do with the people.
By the way, when you're done, you can lower your hand.
Thank you, Forrest. I'll do that.
Who's next for us?
I don't have anybody else right now.
Okay.
You know,
everybody's been talking about going home to their parents and grandparents and what a wonderful thing that is. For some people, that's a very dispiriting and alienating experience. So I think that's a pretty complicated thing. A lot of people here in this conversation have had apparently relatively little conflict with their parents of any deep sort. And so it's comfortable to go home to one's parents or grandparents, but that's not always the case. Secondly, I think it can be very possible to feel alone in the midst of other people. One may be in a full room of people and still feel very alone. Thirdly, for me, Friday nights are particularly nights of wistful nostalgia, when I think of all the people who once were in my life and no longer are. And that sort of comes over me typically on Friday nights.
I have Jay Witt.
Jay Witt, did you want to speak? Okay, let's go to Donna.
Donna?
Okay.
I grew up in New Jersey and had a very happy home, and we would always go down to the shore, to the New Jersey shore, to the beach every year, and even for 40 years. And then I bought a house in Ocean City, Maryland, and I still miss my New Jersey shore, so I bought a sign and I put over the doorway, Jersey Shore. It made me feel at home. Dick likes the Jersey Shore. I mean, you like the Ocean City.
We've enjoyed Sligo by the Sea together, haven't we?
But it makes me feel a lot more at home when I have my Jersey Shore sign up.
Try Jay
I
Witt.
think Jay Witt has opened up his microphone. Jay, did you want to say something?
This is the White Houses.
Oh, okay.
Jay Witt, the White Houses. All right.
There you go.
We are now living in house number 24, so God only knows which of those is home. And we have left a fraction of our hearts in many places, so maybe heaven is our home. I will say that through our years of wandering the planet, I always looked back nostalgically to my home up north of Seattle, where they're having Tulip Festival right now. I thought that's where there are good hearts and gentle people. And then my brother, who was a physician there much of his life, called and said, Judy, you always think this is heaven. It isn't. And then he told me about a tragedy that involved one of our neighbors. So although I love our current home, to me, home is not just place, but people. And the fact that God is our guest.
Hey, Donna?
Gerald, do you want to say something?
Yeah. As Judy mentioned, this is, as far as a house, this is number 24 for us. Obviously, we've lived in a number of different places, 4 different countries internationally. So our own kids would have an interesting comment to make on where they're from. They don't know, they can't identify where they're from either. Obviously, Judy and I have a background of saying, well, we were born in the Northwest in Washington State, but having left the Northwest years ago, how's that?
Go ahead, Gerald.
But one little caveat, we lived for 3 years on the East Coast in Maryland when I was working out of the GC office. And I never felt at home there. Not until we moved back to Loma Linda, where we had done our graduate study, and Judy completed nursing here, and we just felt more at home on the West Coast. And I've never really figured that one out exactly. One of the things is I like to be able to look out and see mountains, and that's not easy to do in the Maryland area. But there's I don't know. I still haven't identified exactly why the West Coast, and particularly Loma Linda area, seems more home than we ever felt on the East Coast.
That's interesting. Bill, Bill Johnson has often said he feels more at home at Loma Linda than he did back east at the church headquarters. So that's a similar thing. I think Donna was going to say something. Donna, she has, there we go. Hi, Donna, do you want to say something? Bronwen, do you want to say something?
Well, I'm interested to hear these people say that they feel more at home on the West Coast after living on the East Coast. I have the opposite. I'm Dick, I'm with Trevin. I miss Maryland. I think it's because I was born in London, grew up as a child in England, and it reminds me a lot more of where I grew up, and I just love it. The green, the trees, more rain. So that I think that felt more, of all the places I've lived in the States, that was more home to me.
So I'm going to try something here. I'm going to try to move this around to prove Kermit's point here about rituals and Friday night. Except this is how I've done it.
Could we
My
have
office
just a
is
second
always
to get Donna in? Can we get Donna in? Donna? No. Huh, I'm sorry.
So what I wanted to do is I've been through a lot of jobs, and my walls have the same things on them. So whenever I work somewhere, I feel I'm home, because even at my office here at the house, you see that? Those pictures have followed me through many jobs, and so whenever I set up my office, I have these that go with me. I just have a new one, which is my farewell from WASP. But like this one right here, I'm trying to get it here. Yeah, that was a breakfast I was invited to attend when Bill Clinton was president, about 100 of us. And I put a whole thing together, including a paper towel from the bathroom, which was embossed with gold. And all of these, my Cal Ripken autographs. And people have asked me, well, what about these little brass things? Well, I say, we were at an antique store and we needed to fill in stuff. And so those have followed me for many years. And then we've moved a lot. And in recent years, this artwork in our room, but more beautifully displayed now than ever before, from all over the world, is our travel wall. And that goes with us wherever we are. The doors are from Morocco, a carpet, of course, from Istanbul, where they rip you off. They know how to do it so well. And so we have done the same thing in terms of having certain things go with us all the time, no matter where we live. And it has made us feel, through all of those different moves, not as many as the White Houses, but there are things that we have carried with us that have given us that sense of home. Now, some of you have alluded to the second P. We talked about place, and some of you can identify a place if you've lived in one place for a long time, but almost everybody on this call have lived in many places and haven't really settled down in one particular place for a long time that they would say, place, this is our home. And so we've had to redefine home based on the places that we live, taking things like even the walls of an office or art pieces from a home to create that feeling that we were still home. One or two of you talked about people, I heard, and that's my second P. People can create that feeling of home. You have to find people where you live to create that feeling. And to be honest, we were having a hard time doing that in the Bay Area. You know, having been around Adventist communities for all of our lives, Tacoma Park, Loma Linda, Beirut, Lebanon, Montevideo, Uruguay, there were built-in relationships and home feelings. We never got that sense in San Francisco or the Bay Area. It was mainly family that created home for us. Our daughter lived fairly near to us. In San Francisco, when you're in apartments, you get to know very few individuals around you. And so there aren't and you don't have the kind of, let's say, long-term connections and values that perhaps you share. And so it's more casual kinds of things. But it's important that you have people that you can create that feeling of home. You probably have people that you can pick up with that you haven't seen for years. The minute you see them, it's like you're home again. It's like you hadn't even been away for more than a couple of days. We have friends in this area, Roger and Linda Tatum, and we've had that kind of relationship with them for over 50 years. We just spent a week in Cabo San Lucas in Mexico, and got out right in the middle of all of this stuff going on. And again, Tom and Val Smith, it was just like we hadn't been apart. And so people, I think, are really important for creating that feeling of home. Would some of you be willing to talk about the people in your lives by name that give you that feeling of being home, even if you haven't seen them for a long time?
Just a second. I was on the phone, not trying to be disrespectful. I was listening, but I'm trying to get through to Donna Carlson, so she's been wanting to talk but hasn't. People, I felt close to Roy Branson.
And you, even before he came back and worked at Loma Linda, that was a relationship that went back several decades, didn't it?
Yes, I first met him at Andrews when I was a student there, and we kept in touch over the years. But then when he moved to Loma Linda, he had an office right next door to mine. We spent a lot of time together, and I thought of him as a brother, I think.
Someone else, I'll start picking on people here in a minute. But if you'd be willing to volunteer, that would be great.
We haven't heard from the Capinos.
Let me say something then. I like to give another dimensions to Dr. Osborn's 3 Ps. Because in my, just for everyone's sake, I'm a psychiatrist. The majority of my patients can feel at home, but there's a segment of patients who can never feel at home, even in their own home. And people ask me, how do you explain these things? And the ability to connect to a person, the ability to connect to a place, is really a function of the first 3 years of life. There's a theory called attachment theory, where the child begins life trying to connect to the mother. And 60% of people have a secure relationship. There's 20% who are extremely anxious. There are 20% who are extremely avoidant. And if you fail to establish a secure relationship during the first 3 years of life, this will haunt you throughout your life in establishing relationships, in moving from one place to another. I have a number of patients who says, I'm going to leave Pennsylvania. I ask them, where are you going? I'm going to Washington, D.C. It doesn't matter whether you go. Your problems are in your head. They follow you wherever you go. So the analogy is, when people dig for oil, they want to make sure there's oil in it. So the ability to connect has another counterpart. We have to have the ability to be attracted to these relationships. We have to have a foundation to build on. If you don't have that, you go from one place to another and you're lost. And so I tell my patients, and if you take these people who are insecure, you will see. And if you bring out a couch and talk to them day in, day out, you will find out that in the first 3 years of life, they had problems in establishing a secure relationship with their primary care provider. And the first primary care provider, of course, is the mother. But it's not always the mother. but the first 3 years of life is very important. That's my 2 cents.
So I see my former pastor, and I'm going to ask you to unmute, Marcos, because you're muted now, because I want to hear something from you. Can you unmute? Okay, Marcos. Marcos was our pastor in San Francisco at the Church 1.0, and his partner Obed is also on. I see him on the picture right next to him, actually, on my screen. And we actually had church together.
Yeah.
Last Sabbath, the same way. I would like you to address the question of how gay Adventist relates to this whole issue of home. And you're also from Brazil, and you are in regular contact, and you fly down to see your family very regularly. Any thoughts? Marcos is also a social worker, teaches at Cal State East Bay now.
Thank you. Can you turn your sound? I'm just asking Obed to turn the sound off because there's a lot of, thank you, Obed. There's a lot of reverberation. Hi, good morning. Yeah, I was just thinking about what Dr. McKinley was saying, because there is a cost to establish home. We move around.
Marcos, I think Obed's going to need to move into another room because the two of you are locked there. I had the same problem with Norma.
He's leaving. Okay, I think it's better now.
All right.
Great, thank you. So there is a cost to establish a home, right? So there is a price to be paid. It takes a toll on you to be moving around and to start again and again and again. And we need a support system, and we do our best. And it's interesting to hear about the struggle to find a place where you can call home. I'm glad that we have connections, and we find that these connections are meaningful, and we've tried to find ways to be in touch with people in different ways. And this week I was thinking a lot about the fact that, especially now that everybody's so isolated, that it's hard, it's difficult to find a place where you can call home. And for LGBTQ people, you need to find a place where you feel safe, because we call home because that's a safe place, right? So that's the place where you feel at ease, where you feel we are not going to be attacked, where you feel that you are not going to be rejected, that you feel that you can rest and breathe. So it's really challenging to find places like this in the Adventist community. It's very difficult. As for me, I worked as an Adventist pastor in Brazil for many, many years. I grew up in the church, and then I left everything. That's when I came to America. So I spent years, many years, without with the feeling that I have lost home. So home was not Brazil anymore, especially because what was home for me was the Adventist community, and that was not there for me anymore. And it took me a long, long time to feel at home in the US. So, but today I resonate with many people said in the beginning. I feel like my home is both in Brazil, in São Paulo, and also here in the Bay Area. I'm an American citizen now, and I feel like both places are home. And in the Bay Area, we created a community, and Dick and Norma were part of this community for many, many years, called Church 1.0. And the reason was exactly to find a place where people could feel safe, where they could explore spirituality, where they could be in contact with God. And I think the main characteristics of the people that were attending this group were the fact that they were Seventh-day Adventists. They were at some point, or still are, and many of them are LGBT. But I think the main thing was exactly that everybody was trying to find a spiritual place, a spiritual home, a place where we could share our doubts, our challenges, and also to know that we are there for each other and to pray for each other.
Thank you, Marcos. And he and Obed have also a beautiful place. We're talking about P, that they have created there in the Bay Area that we've enjoyed many times. Anyone else?
There's someone named N.D. Butler who has her hand up. Now, when people have muted their mics, can they hear us?
Yeah, I can hear. This is Monty.
Oh, okay.
Butler. Good morning, everyone. If you'll indulge me, I've got, in relation, Dick, to your question about people, I've got 3 comments related to that. First, when I logged in, I noticed that Tim Mitchell was on, and what I noticed was just a real warmth. Tim was, I haven't talked with Tim, I don't think, for probably at least 6 years, but as soon as I saw his name there, I had a warmth wash over me. Tim, many years ago, and I still consider him this spiritual mentor of mine, and I felt at home in this little discussion here all the more when I saw Tim there. So to me, it reminded me that it's not just being around people regularly that makes me feel at home, but that history can make a big difference. Hey, Tim, now I see you even. So welcome. This COVID situation has also stuck some of my my extended family in their homes, and they're starting to chat more and send text messages. And I feel very at home with my family, and yet at the same time, I can't imagine being more different than some people, and probably no one in this group other than as much as Tim would understand how different I might be from some of my family members. But it's highlighted it for me, and yet at the same time, that's home for me. And then my third is just thinking about the Seventh-day Adventist Church. My personal beliefs have certainly changed and over time, and yet the Seventh-day Adventist Church is still my home. So it's one thing I try to explain to some of my family members, but I don't think they quite understand that. To me, I like having a big church, or I call it a big tent. A lot of people around me with many, many different beliefs, and it feels it's home for me. I don't know that I could ever be at home in another church. That doesn't mean that I wouldn't share those same beliefs, but the Seventh-day Adventist Church is my home, and I kind of grow spiritually along the way, but this is still my spiritual home.
By the way, we have a McKinley that would like to speak.
McKinley.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Forrest, and good morning, everybody. Happy Sabbath. As I listen to the conversations, both about people and place, I've kind of felt that home includes both elements, but both elements that are found in experiences. At least that's been my take on this. And the experiences for me includes things that are valuable or important. So for example, with respect to some of the places, clean air, good food, a green environment, and then the people that also help accentuate those experiences, I find to be what make up home for me. And the other thing that's also interesting is the ability to recreate those experiences over time, no matter where you are, and the ability to also have pictures and maybe certain memories that help recall those places that one has been. It's particularly important for me as someone who travels a lot. And so I tend to take all of the places that I've been and the experiences that I've had and the people and the foods that I've experienced to make up what I would call home.
I'd like to go back to Monty. Monty, if you could unmute yourself so that you can respond to something I'd like you to talk a little about. You did two wonderful classes on the food needs of individuals, and we now know that that's going to even be exacerbated more, and we're probably going to be looking at more homelessness as well if we look at the full ramifications of what's happening right now. Is there anything that, based on your background in working with those kinds of individuals, both the homeless and those that have food needs, that we can do individually and as a community at this particular time?
Well, I think some of the looking for local organizations that are serving people, they will continue to need money, and cash makes a huge difference. It's much easier to work with cash than physical.
A story on the news last night about a woman who was
So I think Monty was continuing. Go ahead, Monty.
Cash is much easier for these organizations to work with than physical donations. So I'm sure they have real demand, and I know I support at least one organization locally. But one thing to do is to look and see who's been able to continue their operations now, you know, and are modifying things to where they can still get food out to people, and then supporting those organizations. I am not able to help my organization where I normally would go on site right now. But some people may want to look for organizations that are doing that and actually go on site and do some support. The organization I worked with is not doing on-site sort of services now. But I would say looking, anyway, that's my thought.
Okay, I think I recognized Barbara Carino's voice. Barbara, was that your voice I was hearing?
She was just leaving the room. This is Elmer. How are you?
Hey, Elmer.
Good. I wanted just to add the conversation, the idea that a particular kind of endeavor, whether it's music, which you and I have enjoyed together for many, many, many years, or it's playing golf. If you had a golfing buddy, I get together from time to time with a friend of mine who's down in Florida, and it's golf that brings us together. So I think a particular endeavor can also bring people together. So I would add another P, which is play.
LaDon has her hand up again.
I wanted to say that you asked the question about how people who are the most interesting or dear people that make you feel like home. My friend Sigva Tanstad is a very special friend to me because we were in undergraduate, first years of college together. We struggled those years, and now I see that the organizations that I become helper or fight for a cause, the people, the comrades that do help me in that struggle or endeavors to do something, they become my support and my home in a sense. And so when Monty's talking about helping the homeless or people who need food, I think when we engage in something worthwhile to people, those people become the warmest people that struggle with us, as if we're all in a bunker together, especially now. I belong to several organizations that are socially active, and that is very special. Those people are very special to us. We fight together for a cause or policy change or something like that. So advocacy and actual help is ingredients for finding friends that are very supportive.
May I thank LaDon for that, and then also make a commercial? And that is Monty Butler's wife, Lisa, who is a daughter of Bruce Wilcox, sent me a paper that Bruce wrote in 1985, I think, and it's called Homesick at Home. So I'm hoping that one of these days we can take a look at that and discuss it.
So let's just bring up our last P. You know, I obviously was using a homiletical device here. You're supposed to have 3 points, right, in a sermon. I'm not a trained preacher, but I've heard that you're supposed to have 3 points. So my 3, and I thought it was easier to say 3 Ps, place, people, and paradise, or heaven, is another place, of course, where we would like to end. And that is the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We have put a focus, of course, on the ultimate home where we're headed, without it becoming a crutch, because you can let it can become a crutch for people, not to create place and people. We're just waiting for heaven, and heaven's going to come.
Cut them up this morning.
And I had on the sheet that Dave sent out to you a hymn that represents some of that. I'm but a stranger here. Heaven is my home. Earth is a desert drear. Heaven is my home. Danger and sorrow stand round me on every hand. Heaven is my fatherland. Heaven is my home. And then the John 14:23. If anyone loves me, he will obey my teaching. My Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him. So in our last couple of minutes, does anybody have some reflections on that third P, paradise and heaven? What does that mean to you as a home symbol?
Bernard Taylor said, thumbs up on that, must like it.
Unmute yourself, Bernard. Ah, there we go.
On it, but it didn't unmute. Yeah, this is something I've been reflecting on for quite some time, related to the fact that you know, we've moved around the world, and as I've been participating this morning, 2 things are clearly in mind. First, we're all at home, or close to it, you know, for the purposes that we're all at home. If we were sitting down in the class, it wouldn't be the same atmosphere. Secondly, we have a taste of heaven. We've heard from people from all over, and yet we find a unanimity of interest and of focus. And when I grew up, heaven was a vastly different place. And when I came here, sometime, somewhere, it dawned on me that there were so many nationalities, so many people, and to my temperament, that wasn't attractive, because I'm overwhelmed by too many people, and I've sort of wanted to say, well, you know, boy, heaven's not what I thought it was. But then as I've been sitting here this morning, and people I care about, where they came from, it doesn't matter. We all gather together, and we all have a common desire of love and of interest and of focus and of sharing and caring. And I personally enjoyed it this morning.
Giving and receiving.
Eduardo, we need you to turn your mic off. We need Eduardo to turn his microphone off.
Off.
We're hearing everything. There we go.
I move out of the play.
Bernard was talking about how much, in a way, we are at home right now, because we come from different places, and yet.
No, he said Eduardo. Oh, Eduardo. Yes. I'm here. I'm listening.
Go ahead and speak if you want to.
Dude, I just turned it on for the first time, so I don't know what's the issue on the table.
Okay, okay. Karen, we haven't heard from you.
I don't want my voice coming across there. My comments.
We can't hear you because you have your mic muted.
Were you speaking to me?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes.
You need to go out completely. You know, I realized in listening to all of you talk, I'm one of the people that Dr. Capino described, and I have tremendous difficulty trusting people or feeling at home anywhere. So it's made me a little sad and a little difficult to relate to all of you. But I am sure, and I'm sure that God can heal that completely, and I'm sure that I will feel at home in heaven
All you
someday.
had to do is push the.
Okay, I think the punders are in need to turn off their mic.
Hey, David,
Yes.
you can mute those mics with as a host.
Can I do that?
Yes. Power.
Yes.
Huh, okay. Looks like Bronwen's about to speak.
David, the way you would unmute people is if you open Manage Participants.
Yes.
The participants will all pop up on the left-hand side. And if
Okay.
you just hover over their names, you'll be able to see mute, and you can just go in and mute them.
Okay, thank you.
So that's Manage Participants.
Thank you.
I was going to say that it's interesting how the idea of heaven changes, of paradise changes over time. I remember growing up in the church, in a poor church, in a poor neighborhood in São Paulo, and hearing about paradise and what heaven was going to be. It was fascinating for me when I finally came to the West to understand that whatever the version of paradise that had been preached in Brazil was very much like an American suburbia. And but then you don't know, we don't know what it is, right? We don't know exactly what's waiting for us over there. We are really hoping, we know that, we know and hope for to have God and to be with people that we love, but we don't know exactly. We know what the Bible says, but how to know for sure before we are there. My point being is that for now, I think, especially as a social worker today, I tend to think that we really hope and we look for the future when are not going to be dealing with this kind of situations that we are dealing right now with plagues and illnesses and war and everything that's bad around the world. And at the same time, there are so many people that are living very, very difficult lives around us. So while I'm living here, what can I do to make the living conditions of my neighbors, of people around me better? How can I, what do I have that I can share and support those who are living around us? We live and we hope for paradise. We are not quite there yet, and we believe in God's grace, and that's all that we need to be there. And for now, what can I do to ameliorate, to make better the lives of those who are living around us? And there are plenty of people in pain in many different levels, and we can intervene in many levels, in many ways, to support them.
You know, Dave, I think that is a wonderful pastoral conclusion to our presentation this morning. Thank you, Marcos. And I think this time is up. And Marcos, I think you have highlighted perhaps some of the most important things that we can do individually. So why don't I offer a word of prayer, and then I'm sure, Dave, you'll have some comments to make after that. We pray, our Heavenly Parent, for your guidance over the next few days, as many of us are stuck in our homes. We pray that this presentation today and the thoughts by many class members will help as they define home for themselves and perhaps for others as a place, people, and paradise. We pray that your life will fill our lives as we try to help those around us who are all stuck at home now in ways that perhaps we don't anticipate they need to be helped. Thank you for being with us today and for this community in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you to Dick, and thank you for the 3 Ps. That's very, very helpful. Now that officially ends our meeting, but there are people who still would like to talk, so we'll continue for those who would like to. Bronwen, I think you have a hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to respond to Karen. Thank you for sharing what you did. The vulnerability to what Dick said. And I just want to say, I'm so glad that you're part of our group.
Thank you.
It warms my heart that someone from as far away as Wisconsin is part of our group. And that means you're part of our family, our Sabbath School home. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
We have Donna.
Donna, can you hear us? Huh. Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
McKinley has his hand up.
Okay. McKinley,
But he's muted.
we need him to unmute his mic though.
Yes. Thank you, Brown, and thank you, Dave. So as some of you have known from my comments in other classes, I'm really fascinated by this whole idea of entropy. And I tend to extend that concept to the reality of heaven. I think of heaven or paradise as an entropy-free space. Jesus talks of heaven also as a place of no decay, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt or decay. I think of it as the Bible talks about a place of no sickness, like this coronavirus that we are dealing with. Last night I was watching a concert by a group from Norway, the Oslo Gospel Choir, and as I looked over the audience, all of those people were all close together, and it saddened me that under these circumstances there would not be the ability to have such a concert ever. And the whole idea of the worship experience seemed to be taken away. And I thought perhaps only the Lord might be able to, through his providence, help take care of this coronavirus thing. But then another thing that we will expect to experience in an entropy-free space like heaven is there will be no more dying. There will be materials that don't corrode. We've heard about streets of gold as Revelation talks about. There will be a place of continuous learning. I've shared with Dave how the Bible places this emphasis on understanding, and how understanding is very important to the whole salvation experience. And then finally, there will be blissful experiences. The Bible talks about eyes having not seen or ears heard, the things that God has prepared for those who love him. So when I think about heaven, I think about an entropy-free space.
Linda Halstead. Linda?
There, I think I'm on.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for the group and for the opportunity to connect, because of the isolation. It's really meaningful. I am a product of Loma Linda. My dad was going to medical school when I was born. I've lived here all my life, although I've traveled and had some opportunity to live outside. But 75 years of living in Loma Linda, I know where the bodies are buried, and I could take you on tours of the area and show you things that you might not know about this whole area. But what it really came down to in the recent times here is how important the people have been at work. And that's what a blessing that has been. And, you know, there are people that I might not talk to when I was at work, and work brought us together. What a wonderful thing. But there might be people who I didn't see for weeks or years, but when I connected with them, there was a warmth and a caring that was marvelous. People that would pray with me, that would share, when we could share stories, people who I might not have talked to for so long, but would ask about family. And I found that so endearing over time. And then when you get retired, suddenly that all goes away and you have to recreate that somewhere all on your own. And I've always thought of myself as an introvert, that it didn't matter. And now I find out how much it does matter. The other part, so I think that will be something about heaven that will be very important, is the freedom and the ability to connect with people and be there for each other. The other thing I've always thought heaven would be about is creativity. And that has been something, when it gets stifled, I have really missed it. One time my home was robbed, and everything that provided me creativity, camera, sewing machines, anything that gave me joy as far as creativity was stolen. And that was a tremendous loss. Now I am in a situation where do I have access to my creative tools? So that's just another flavor. So I thought maybe that added a little more to the discussion.
We have Monty. Monty? Yeah, Monty.
Yeah. Well, oh, I didn't have my hand up. That was a thumbs up. That was way back when.
Oh, okay, all right.
That was when we were ready to sign off, and so I just gave class a thumbs up.
Okay. All right.
David, can you hear me?
I think that's Eduardo.
Yes, this is Eduardo. I just want to say that I am happy to see you. Do you hear me?
Yeah, just happy to see you.
Oh, yeah, I'm happy.
David, do you hear me?
David, sorry, David.
Oh. He's got it on mute for himself.
Well, thank you, Donna. I'd like to emphasize that she will be with us next week to bring us up to date on what's happening vis-a-vis Roe v. Wade.
Yes,
current
David is
situation.
busy.
Okay, Eduardo, I think you want to talk.
I just want to say that I'm happy to see you.
I'm happy to see you too, but I don't really.
Well, you don't see me, but I see you, and I'm happy to see you as a pastor. You are a pastor in the Sabbath school class. Do you hear me, David?
Yes, thank you, Eduardo. Thank you. It's good to hear your voice again. Kermit looks like he's going to speak. Did you want to say more, Eduardo?
No, no.
Well, welcome home.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Kermit, I think you're going to speak.
Okay, this is Kermit's wife, Donna. My name's Donna too. And we are newlyweds. So we are trying to establish a paradise of a new home. And of what Dick said, a lot of the memories and things we have, we're making new memories and putting two homes together and two lives together.
Wow.
Yeah, and you know, I don't know what my question is, but it's a different kind of a home thing, because some of the things that I've lived here in this home for 45 years, and Kermit's moving here, and now we're trying to make a new home together. In our
That's going to be fun.
we got married August 4, so it's
Today is 8 months.
Wow.
yeah. So it's a new home, you know, that
We have Ladon. Ladon?
I just wanted to say it's interesting that the paradise we think about is very comfortable, and it's very struggle free, and it's just smooth like clouds. I don't see paradise like that. I think it would be boring paradise if we don't have to struggle even in heaven. Our most cherished memories come from stretching our intellectual muscles, and we come from very wealthy backgrounds. Even if we were poor, our environment was not that oppressive. And I think for a person that always struggled, it would be nice to, I think it's amazing that paradise for rich people is comfortable in the clouds. I don't like to think of that as such.
Okay, we have Linda.
Thank
Linda?
you, Ladon. Linda Halstead, is she coming back on?
Sorry, I was done. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. I see Ted Lefterov. Do you want to speak, Ted, about this idea of home? Because you've lived in more than one part of the world.
No, I'm just enjoying the conversation. Thank you.
Okay. All right, because Ted has lived in Bulgaria and the United Kingdom and in Texas. That's a whole nation unto itself, Texas.
Yes, I lived in Michigan, in Texas, and California. So those are two different countries in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
But
Okay.
I enjoyed experiencing different cultures, even among, people in the United States. So that's fun. But if I can say, I've noticed that most of the time when we talk about home, we don't talk about walls, a house, okay? We talk about people. And as I think about my life, it's really home, it's people. But it's a much more complicated because it's affected by our experiences. I mean, we can talk also about your culture and also your character, right? I mean, some people, even in our conversation, some people said, well, I don't like people, right? Like Bernard. My wife is the same. She is overwhelmed. She doesn't feel at home when there are a lot of people. I'm the opposite. So home can be very different things for different people, which is fascinating as well. I mean, I remember when I was dating my wife, went to England, and she went to work a night shift. So guess what I did? I went to a soccer game. I mean, as soon as I entered that place with 60, 70,000 people, I felt at home, right? So, I mean, all these interests and hobbies, and so it has to do with people. And in my listening to that conversation, I mean, that's what I think it's what home is. It's mostly dealing with people, not so much with the house, particular house, right?
Thank you. I'm glad you spoke up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's Bernard. He wants to say something.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to Ladon and say that I really resonate with what you were saying. And in fact, in the last day or so, I was doing the dishes. I like to do things that involve my hands and keep me engaged and leave me free to think. And I realized that in the current situation, for those of us who are virus-free and, you know, outside of our immediate influence, staying inside is really the picture I have of heaven, because there's a big feature made of the place. But for the people who heard it, they had no place. And for them, heaven was a place to call their own. And I've thought, could I go on for eternity like this? There has to be a whole lot more to it than this. It's not a matter of happiness, but of some sense of satisfaction, of value. Do we lose all sense of satisfaction and identity in our picture of heaven? And it's a challenge, and I've only just begun to think about it, but thank you for steering me in that direction.
Bronwen, are you about to say something?
Nope. I was just acknowledging what Bernard just said.
Okay. Well, I'd like to know what Bernard and LaDon think paradise is like.
Yeah, well, that's a growing experience. You see, you get the sort of numbers together like we have at the moment. Where does the food come from? Who prepares it? And does our picture of heaven require that pictures of people's, that the other people's heaven is nothing like, where is my place for all of this? Who takes care of everything? And will we go through a new experience of maybe an entirely different kind of developing aids to help us in doing what we're doing, some sort of technology, some resources? When you take this many people in a collapsing economy, we don't have a bright future at the moment. I hope it'll turn a corner in a month or so, but how do you sustain it? And our picture of heaven has so often been shaped by Harry Anderson and all the pretty things, and you don't know what goes on behind. And I remember as a kid thinking about flowers. So you pick them, they've been in your house for 100 years, you throw them out, but nothing dies. And so it becomes a huge dump, and nobody to collect trash, nobody to do the work. Everybody has to have a happy time. And, you know, and maybe you're learning more about me than about heaven, but that's the sort of thing that weighs on my mind.
I think
worried about being bored in heaven.
I think we will cry for a long time in heaven because of all the sadness and mistakes and the hurt that people have suffered. I don't think it will equalize just because we have moved to a different realm. I think we carry the memory of mistakes and hurts. And I think we have to somehow rectify those things. And then perhaps we can figure out how to live with each other in peace. How could us belligerent and angry people or kind people live with people who are not like us in a lovely place? Does heaven have rules? Does heaven have regulations that we need to deal with? Is God going to manipulate every wrong thing that we do, even in heaven? I think these are things that we need to figure out here, because we have to live with each other without causing so much social ill. And I don't think heaven is going to be that great if we are transported as is. It's not going to be that great. I think we have to figure it out.
Wow.
What do we do with the text that says there shall be no more tears, Ladan, if we're going to be crying for a long time?
I think that's the wishful thinking.
So yeah, the text is Revelation 21. How do you explain that?
I think people wrote the Bible at the time that they were wishing for something better. But we still have hurt other people. Are they going to forget?
But Scripture creates the place to which you're describing, Ladon, because even in the picture of heaven, God wipes away all tears. I think there is something that lies behind that of the sort that you are suggesting.
I don't know. I'm tending to think that the Bible was a social organizer. People wrote as they wished under inspiration. And when we read something in the Bible, doesn't mean that it's exactly the way we have to deal with it. I don't know, maybe I have become old and decrepit, but I think there is so much in our souls that we have to rectify. And I think there's a Ellen White quotation that says, we will take our characters as is to heaven. It just, maybe God will scrub it down, but maybe there's a way to do it. And I look forward to that. I look forward to being edified. When I come to Sabbath school and I say something and my idea is not welcome, I like it because I'm developing, I'm growing, and I like my ideas to be edified. Is that going to be niche in heaven? Is that going to be not a way we do things in heaven, that we don't edify each other? How about policies that we have made that hurt people? Is that going to just go by the wayside? People have suffered? Nuh-uh. I think there are books in heaven. What are we going to do?
You know, this is pretty tricky, I think, because we are going to have some sense of continuity in our identities, right, in paradise. I will know who I am, and you will know who I am, so we don't lose our identities completely. And yet, my own identity is wrapped up with my history, and my history is filled with sorrow as well as joy. And therefore, if all my tears are wiped away, will that mean that I am no longer who I am? And I think I heard an answer to that makes sense to me, and that is, a person said, you know, we can get to the place where we remember the pain without reliving it. And I think there might be, I don't think we can ever forget these setbacks and disappointments, but I don't know that we have to keep reliving them. I think I can recall certain painful times, and I've gotten to the place where I can remember them without reliving them. But it takes a while. For a long time, one relives it. As long as every time the thought comes to one's mind, it's another journey through that dark, dark tunnel.
David.
Yes.
I tried to put me on video, but I don't know how to manage this system. But I would like to say that heaven wouldn't be a home if we remember our failures. I think that what happened to Nebuchadnezzar's dream, he forgot the dream. I think we're going to forget all our mistakes.
Say that again, Eduardo.
I think that we are not going to have memory of all the bad things that we did.
Will we remember the good things?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Oh, will we remember the good things we did?
I don't think so, because we are going to remember the dream of Sister Huay when he met one of the pioneers in heaven, and he asked Sister Huay, what happened after we die? And they tried to remember, and Sister Huay said, it's not worth it to remember all the tribulation that we went by. And I think that our good works are not worth it. I think that the only thing that works is to make it to heaven and then travel all that universe. The only thing that is going to remain in our minds is going to see Jesus' scars, to remember how costly was our sins. I don't know, to me, heaven would be heaven remembering this world. I think this world is going to pass away memories and histories.
You know, I'd like to get Dick back in here because he launched this excellent discussion. I would say, as he's gearing up to speak, that this question of identity is a very difficult one, even in our own lives. In what sense am I, at my age, the same person I was when I was 13, 60 years ago? And in some ways, I'm the same person, but in other ways, I'm not. And I think much depends upon the purpose for which we're asking the question. If the question is, can I get a driver's license, whether I'm 16 or 14 makes a big difference. On the other hand, if I'm going to inherit a lot of money, I want to minimize the differences between the person I once was and the person I now am. So I think the question of identity is pretty tricky in this life, and maybe pretty tricky in the next one. Dick, what do you want to say?
I'd like to hear Elmer's thoughts. What you talked about earlier today, I think, gave us some overreaching, perhaps, ways of viewing some of this. Do you have any thoughts on this?
My thoughts about this is, I'm not going to minimize heaven, but we don't have to bring our problems in heaven. We resolve them in our therapy sessions. So most of these issues are developmental issues, like David had mentioned. You know, for instance, for me, I'm one of 4 children, so I struggle with paranoia. I thought my mom liked my older brother better than me. But when I attained my maturity, it was moot. So I don't know why we have to go to heaven and solve our problems. We can solve our problems while on earth. There's no reason why we should bring all our problems in heaven. There's no reason to bring excess baggage in heaven. We can solve them in here. And almost always, it's just a matter of different opinions or age-appropriate or developmental milestones. It's just a misunderstanding. You know, I see them all the time. You know, the experience. Like, for instance, I had a child who didn't believe in God. Never believed in God. Turns out to be, he grew up in a very chaotic family whose father was an alcoholic, and every time he got angry, he would yell and scream. And even when he was 4 or 5 years old, his father would pull a gun at him and point at his head. He grew up not believing in God. But as we process this thing, years and years, he eventually was able to understand his past and bring himself up to his level of maturity.
But you know, sometimes our pain is so close to our identity that we want to hang on to it. We want to hang.
That's right.
I recall once, I'm sorry? I can recall once when I was going through a tough time, my father said, "Don't worry, you'll be happy again." And that made me angry because I didn't want to be happy again. I wanted to experience this loss and forever think of myself as this wounded person. But my dad was right. I did become happy again.
Yes, we take this shield of being victimized, so we get things easily because, oh, poor Elmer, we'll give it to you because you're victimized, you know. So people don't give those things up because they get secondary gains. But if you confront them and you work with these people, they can get out of
it.
David?
Yes.
So I like how you put it. I think that's, I mean, at least that's where my understanding is. We remember, but we don't relive it. And don't we, I mean, the doctors can speak out, but don't we do the same with psychological trauma or anxiety or stuff like that, right? You seek help and the doctors try to live to understand those things, and then you remember them, but you don't want to relive those things, right? I mean, I remember 7 years ago, I had this, I even didn't know the word, right? Anxiety, until I got to the doctor and he tried to help. So now I laugh at it, of how I reacted. So I remember it, but I don't want to go through that as well. Sorry?
There are a couple of factors involved with situations like this. We have a diagnosis called post-traumatic stress disorder. And what happens is our biological composition is geared for a lower level. It doesn't take long to hit it. So when we do therapy, we also give medications to block the effects of the emotional overload. So when you're talking to someone who had undergone trauma in the past, you see to what level you can bring them up. And if they're breaking through with anxiety, you give them a little bit of medication just to make sure they can get by and deal with the issue. And you do it gradually, slowly. And eventually, for the most part, they can come around and turn around.
Yeah, and that's why I think that in heaven we probably will remember, because we will probably have our characters, right? We'll know each other, but we would not like to relive it or cry. Now, if you take the Bible that it's only wishful thinking, okay, that's, you know, we cannot, I mean, we cannot even argue or discuss. But remember what Paul says, right? I think it's either 1st or 2nd Corinthians where he writes, I mean, heaven is like, we cannot even imagine what will be like. So it's a good discussion, but maybe when we go there, we will like, wow, we couldn't imagine even what we were talking about. So
Well,
I don't believe.
I would imagine going to heaven would be a second chance of going back. I remember when I was finishing my training and I was taking group therapy. My professor told us the only way you can grow up really is you have to go back to your family and rectify the things that you've done or the way you. So family reunion has a function because you go back, you're 1 year wiser than 5 years ago. And every year you get an understanding. So I would imagine when we get to heaven, it's not that we bring our baggages there. We're given a second chance to rectify things and get an understanding of why did you do this to me, you know? And
Can
then,
I say, oh, go ahead.
and then maybe with our new understanding, we can level up the field.
John, you were going to say something?
Yeah, something that I do believe, I hope heaven will be like, is that there will be no fear and there will be opportunities for growth.
Well, fear is our emotion because we don't know what will happen.
That's true. And in heaven, we have the assurance that we are okay and we will never die and we will grow. So that I hope in heaven, but who knows what heaven is like. When I was a child, I used to take comfort in that lovely place of heaven. But Dr. Larson, I heard you talk about all the injustices, and I hope there would be rectification of those things in heaven when we grow and when we trust. I don't know what heaven's going to be like, but I hope there is justice.
I brought this up this morning, linking Dr. Osborn's 3 P's to another dimension, because the experience we get the first 3 years of life are very important. The predictability, the acceptance. Parents are not at fault. What makes trajectory go haywire is one day the mother is attuned, next day she's not attuned. So the child is growing up and getting to be very anxious. Now, what will my mother be today? Will be the mother that was attentive one time, or is she the one who will ignore me this time around? So when I'm talking to, I'm a child psychiatrist. So when I talk to the parents, they tell me, what should I do, Dr. Capino? You don't have to change anything. Just be predictable. Just be regular. When they call you, be there right away. But if you let them wait, they'll get a level of frustration, and those emotions are etched in our brain.
Wow.
There's a hand, Mr. Lawson, Dr. Lawson.
There's a hand somewhere.
Hello. It's, I've been thinking about what we've been talking about, and I've been thinking of different pictures of paradise and heaven that I've had in my life. I remember when I was in an undergrad, there was an evangelist, and the evangelist used to think that his biggest way of attracting people to the church was to talk about streets of gold and gates of pearl. And I was never very turned on by that. And so I felt like, you know, this is just an image. What's this about? And then a year or so ago, Paradise burned. And I was interested that the diction used the word paradise. Can paradise burn? And that reminded me, and this is what I'd like to ask Dave about. I had a friend who did his graduate work at Claremont, and when I asked him about heaven, he said, "I will be in the memory of God." That was his view, and he'd learnt that at Claremont, and he'd come to be convinced of that heaven was being in the memory of God, whatever that means. So I'm quite confused about heaven. Can you enlighten us about the Claremont view, please, David?
Could I comment on that just a bit? That's a pretty standard view of process thought. And for me, it's quite comforting. It's hard for me to imagine life beyond the grave. I'm not doubting it, but it's hard for me to imagine. And my fallback position is to say, well, the doctrine of objective immortality, that's what they call it. One remains as an object of God's memory. And minimally, I think that's what we're going to be, minimally. Now, Paul says that nothing can separate us from the love of God, right? In Christ Jesus our Lord. And for me, minimally, that means we will never be forgotten. Now, you know, that's the least I can believe, and I actually find it quite comforting. Quite that is one view at Claremont. It's the process philosophy view, and I have been comforted by it because it suggests that my ups and downs and my lefts and rights will not be forever forgotten, but will remain in the memory of God. How long do we remember are we in the memories of human beings, maybe 3 generations at most, 4 generations, and then we're pretty much forgotten. But this process thought is that the world will, the universe will forever be different, and God will forever remember how we lived our lives in this universe. So yeah, that's a Claremont view. Now there are other views in Claremont, at Claremont, but that's a pretty standard one. You want to respond to that, Ron?
I don't think, I mean, I'm sufficiently unsure of what, I can't imagine what it's really like, you know. So I guess I'm waiting to see.
Yeah, that's it's hard for me to picture paradise, but I can picture God remembering us, even to put it in very secular terms. If we have some idea of evolution, every life makes a difference in the flow of the universe. And that difference may be very small, but it still makes a difference. But I do find lots of comfort in the idea of objective immortality. I hope for subjective immortality, but it's hard for me to imagine. And I'm not abandoning that hope, but Paul says we are saved by hope, right? Not only by faith, but we are saved by hope. So I have that hope.
May I say something about Solzhenitsyn? Any of you who have read Gulag Archipelago, that is a book of memory of the people who were killed in the gulags, and he researched and put their names in that book for us to remember, so their lives would not have been wasted. I think this is something we hope, the memory. I think that I'm not very familiar with Judaism. I think that's the main theme, that while we are here, let's make a difference, because heaven in its objectivity doesn't really exist. We don't know. None of us do know. We have some inkling of people's dreams. But remembering, unless you're really, really bad, nobody remembers you. Or really, really good. You know, Mother Teresa may be remembered, or Jesus is remembered, or Hitler will be remembered, some things, but not most of us.
Yeah, that's sad.
So how do we remember unless somebody records it? And we're talking about books of heaven. There is a record. There is a record. I hope there is rectification.
If there's no record, we won't know who we are. I think identity is really hooked up with history. So yeah, McKinley, did you want to say something? I see your hand here.
Yes, I do. Thank you, David. So I want to comment on the last few minutes of this conversation that seems to be navigating the ideas of a happy paradise versus a somewhat challenging paradise experience. And I think about it in terms of the teachings and the promises of God that I like to consider as the commitments of God. And we find some of that in the reflections of Christ when he talks about coming to give people a life that is one of fulfillment, abundance, and perhaps satisfaction. And I like to think that Christ wasn't only talking about the experience of life in our world, but also the experience of life in heaven. And an important part of that experience is this idea of peace. You know, Jesus says he came to give us peace, not the kind of peace that the world might, that we might have in this world's experience, but I would like to think it's a kind of a heavenly peace. And so when we go to heaven, I think part of that experience is going to be an experience that gives us peace of mind. And I don't know that you can have peace of mind, as one of our participants said, that is filled with carrying the baggages from this world. So I think an experience that is full of peace is going to be part of what we live in heaven.